A recovering patient at Somerset Medical Center had digoxin in her blood. No doctor had ordered it. A heart drug in someone whose heart was fine. And the nurse who found her first was already calm, already washing his hands. His name was Charles Cullen. He was a registered nurse. And for 16 years, across 9 hospitals and a nursing home in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, he had been the last face many of his patients ever saw. You trust nurses without thinking about it. You have to. When you are at your weakest, flat on your back with a tube in your arm, you hand your life to a stranger in scrubs, and you assume that stranger is on your side. That assumption is the quiet machinery that lets a hospital function at all. Cullen understood that machinery better than anyone. He lived inside its blind spot for a decade and a half. Start at the beginning, because the beginning is where the warning signs were loudest and heard least. Cullen's early life was a catalogue of loss. His father died when he was an infant. His mother died in a car accident when he was 17, and by his own account it broke something in him that never healed. He tried to end his own life more than once, starting young. He joined the Navy, served on a submarine, and felt bullied and alone there too. When he became a nurse in the late 1980s, he had finally found a place where he mattered, where he had control, where people needed him. He began killing almost immediately, not after years of pressure, not after some final breaking point. Almost from the moment the access was his. His method was medication. He would slip into a patient's room, often at night, and inject a drug the patient was never prescribed. Digoxin, a heart medication, in doses that threw the heart into chaos. Insulin, which could send blood sugar crashing to lethal lows. Norepinephrine, which is how the 21-year-old died. Sometimes he did not use a syringe at the bedside at all. Sometimes he tampered with the IV bags in the supply room, punctured them, poisoned them in advance, and slid them back into the stack so that some other nurse, hours later, would hang a bag of quiet death without ever knowing it. The drug found its victim when he was nowhere near the bed. He did not need to be in the room when they died. That was the horror of it. The weapon waited. A nurse could watch him leave a patient's room, looking exactly like a nurse who had just checked a chart. And there would be nothing to see, because the killing did not always happen in front of anyone. It happened in the bloodstream, on a delay, in the dark. And there was one more layer of cover, built into the hospital itself. When a patient on a lot of medication takes a sudden turn, doctors do not immediately suspect murder. They suspect the illness. They suspect the body finally losing a fight it was already losing. Every death Cullen caused had a ready-made explanation waiting for it. And for years the explanation held, because no one was looking for a hand on the syringe. Here is the part that should have stopped him early, and didn't. People noticed. At hospital after hospital, colleagues grew uneasy. Death rates on his shifts drew quiet questions. At one facility, dozens of suspicious deaths piled up during the window he worked there. Empty medication vials turned up where they should not have been. Computerized drug dispensing records showed him pulling medicines for patients who were not his, at hours that made no sense. He was investigated internally more than once. He was let go. He was asked to resign. He was moved on. But nobody made the accusation out loud in a way that followed him. A suspicion is not a lawsuit, proof fact, and a hospital that fires a nurse for murder without ironclad evidence is a hospital that can be sued into ruin. So the calculation made quietly in office after office came out the same way every time. Cut him loose. Say nothing. Let him be someone else's problem. When the next hospital called to check his history, they got a clean reference, or a neutral one, or silence. His record followed him looking spotless. Cullen simply drove to the next town, filled out the next application, and started again, in a fresh building full of people who had no reason on paper to watch him. Think about what that means. The system that was supposed to protect patients was instead protecting itself. And in protecting itself it passed a killer from hand to hand like a hot coal nobody wanted to hold. He claimed he was merciful. He told people he could not stand to watch patients suffer, that he was sparing them the trauma of coding, of being resuscitated, of dying slowly. It was a lie, and the nurses who worked beside him proved it without meaning to. Because whenever a patient coded, Cullen was always the first one through the door, working furiously to save them. Of course he was. He had caused the code himself. He knew exactly what he had given, and he knew there was no reversing it. The frantic rescue was theater. He got to be the hero of an emergency he had personally created. And the victims were not only the old and the fading, though many were. One of them, Michael Strenko, was 21 years old. He was recovering. Cullen killed him anyway. For 16 years this held. 16 years of a pattern hiding in plain sight, protected by the very thing that should have exposed it, the assumption that a nurse is safe. It ended in Somerset County. 2 detectives began pulling on a thread that would not come loose. Patients were turning up with strange, unordered levels of digoxin in their systems. That is not a thing that happens by accident. Someone was administering it. The investigation circled closer, and it found an ally on the inside. Her name was Amy Loughren. She was a nurse at Somerset Medical Center, and she was Cullen's friend. She trusted him. She had no idea. When the detectives came to her with what they suspected, she had to hold 2 impossible facts in her head at once: that the man she liked and worked beside was gentle and kind, and that the evidence said he was killing the people they were both supposed to save. She chose the patients. She agreed to wear a wire. Picture the courage that took. She had a heart condition of her own. She was raising children. And she agreed to sit across from a man she considered a friend at a bar in Bridgewater, New Jersey, with a recording device hidden on her body, knowing that if the police were right, she was sharing a table with someone who killed people for reasons only he understood. She had to keep her voice level. She had to keep liking him to his face while the tape rolled. She confronted him anyway. She told him she knew. She said they could go to the police together, that she would walk in beside him, that they could make the call as friends. She gave him the chance to be the person she had believed he was. He would not take it. "I can't," he told her. "I can't." And he stood up and left. Investigators were waiting in the parking lot. The recording, and everything it confirmed, was enough. But it was enough. The pattern, the digoxin, the recording, the years of quiet deaths finally converged into something a prosecutor could hold. Cullen was arrested in December of 2003. Then he started to talk, and what came out was worse than anyone had prepared for. He confessed to killing patients at nearly every place he had worked. He did it methodically, hospital by hospital, giving investigators an estimate for each building as if reading off an inventory. When they asked him how many in total, he told them he thought it was somewhere between 30 and 40. He could not always remember the specifics. He had done it so many times, in so many rooms, in so many towns, that the faces blurred together into a number he could only guess at. In one tape confession, he described dosing 3 or 4 people a week at his very first nursing job. Do the arithmetic on 16 years, and that number stops being 40. The people who studied this case most closely came to believe the real total ran into the hundreds. Many of the early records had been destroyed. Many of the deaths could never be proven because the victims were sick to begin with, and no one had thought to look. Cullen may be the most prolific serial killer in American history, and the honest answer is that we will never know the true count. In 2006, he pleaded guilty. 29 murders confirmed across 2 states, plus attempted murders, and he was sentenced to consecutive life terms that guaranteed he would die in prison. When asked, years later, whether he was sorry, he said yes. He also admitted he was not sure he would have stopped if he had not been caught. Sit with that, because it is the real lesson under the body count. We tell ourselves that evil looks like evil, that a monster will announce itself, that our instincts will fire, that we will feel the wrongness in the room. Cullen is the proof that this is a comforting fiction. He was quiet. He was helpful. He was the colleague who showed up first to help. His victims looked into an ordinary, unremarkable face and felt safe. And that feeling of safety was the last thing many of them ever felt. The most dangerous predator is not the one who frightens you. It is the one you have already decided to trust, standing in the role where trust is not a choice but a requirement. Cullen did not break into anywhere. He was invited. He wore the uniform. He was handed the keys, the drugs, the access, and the benefit of the doubt over and over by an entire system that assumed a man in scrubs must be on the side of the living. And notice who finally stopped him. Not the internal reviews. Not the resignations. Not the quiet paper trail that got wiped clean at every stop. It took one nurse who was willing to say the words out loud, into a microphone, across a table, to a man she was afraid of. Every institution that suspected Cullen had chosen silence because silence was safer for the institution. Amy Loughren chose the harder thing, and that single choice ended a 16-year killing spree that 9 hospitals had failed to end. The lesson is not only that evil hides in trusted places. It is that the only thing that ever drags it into the light is a person willing to name it, knowing what it might cost them. You still make that assumption. You have to. The next time you lie in a hospital bed, you will hand your life to a stranger and trust that they mean you no harm, and almost always you will be right. The machinery only works because that trust is real. Charles Cullen spent 16 years proving how much damage one person can do inside it. Digoxin in the blood of a patient whose heart is fine is not an accident. It is a signature. It was there, in vial after vial, in room after room, for a decade and a half. And for 16 years, the nurse who kept finding those patients first stayed calm, kept washing his hands, and no one who could have stopped him was willing to say it out loud.